My name is Keira Voss, 35 years old. The chandelier light made everything look softer than it was, like truth could be blurred by gold. Perfume and seared steak mingled with floor polish, and the ballroom's laughter clinked as neatly as the glassware. My hair was twisted into the kind of bun that says invisible, my black dress pressed flat beneath a white apron, a tray balanced on my left palm as if I'd been born with it. To the guests, I was nobody. To NCIS, I was the thread they'd slipped through a seam to see if the fabric would split. Earlier that week, Director Collins had called me into his office, where framed photos of sailors and folded flags put a moral shine on every wall. "We've intercepted chatter about a defense contract," he said, voice even. "Private deal, off the record. We think it's dirty. Mason's name is on it." I'd raised an eyebrow. The General Mason? Hero of Kandahar, decorated twice. He's about to sign a $2 billion weapons deal with Vanguard Systems, Collins said. "We're hearing whispers the paperwork is forged. We can't blow it open yet. We need eyes inside." Eyes inside was how I ended up with a tray instead of a sidearm. The Willards' ballroom glowed like polished brass. Waiters moved in disciplined arcs, the pianist stitched mellow jazz through the chatter, and the air conditioning hummed, the way a war room breathes before a decision. I kept to the periphery, skimming faces I'd studied on briefings, contractors with practiced grins, lobbyists with perfect teeth, a senator from Virginia, and then Mason, tall, silver hair, posture a lesson in gravity. He drew attention the way a planet holds moons. He caught my eye once, or maybe I imagined it. Years ago, I'd served under him in the Gulf before he rose to fame and I transferred to NCIS. Back then, he said honor means doing right when no one's watching. The irony hovered like a second chandelier over the first. Halfway through the entree course, a man in a gray suit slid close to Mason and laid a thin, unmarked folder by his plate. One red seal broke the blankness. I drifted nearer, refilling water as if water had any thirst left to solve in this room. The seal's eagle looked almost right, but the wing spread felt off, and the serif on United was a hair too stiff. Small wrongnesses are the kind that get agents killed. Mason cracked the folder open. My tray dipped a fraction as my eyes landed on the header, Project Harbor Light. Beneath it, the authorizing signature froze me in place. Colonel Adam Carrion. Colonel Carrion died 5 years ago in Helmand Province. I'd watched the footage of his flag folding in a windowless room with a vending machine that never took crumpled bills. His signature should have died with him. I pivoted toward the kitchen doors, the smell of garlic and heat flaring as they swung, and angled my mouth toward the mic taped under my collar. "Control. This is Sparrow. Confirm signature for Carrion." Static, and then a low reply through my earpiece. "Negative. Carrion deceased. No authorization since 2019. "What did you see?" "A contract. Vanguard. $2 billion. Mason's about to sign. Do not intervene. Repeat. Observe only. Observe only." My heart drummed in my wrists. I stepped back into the ballroom. A lobbyist I didn't recognize from the deck blinked at me, like he'd seen me somewhere else once. Base commissary, a briefing hall. His smile faltered, resumed. "Pinot," he said too loudly, and I poured, grateful for the noise his request made in a room that suddenly felt like a chapel before confession. I moved past a mirrored pillar and caught my own reflection first, then something behind me. A man standing where a server shouldn't be, watching the head table, not the guests, eyes like ledger lines. The service corridor camera, I remembered, had a blind spot where the floral arch blocked the lens. I'd seen it on the schematics, circled it in my mind, and let it go. Now it pulsed like a hazard light. Mason lifted his pen. Cameras flashed. Toasts waited like arrows on bowstrings. The Vanguard CEO's smile was the happy mask of a man about to watch his value rocket. In training, they teach you to think fast, act slow, but sometimes conscience breaks the stopwatch. I shifted the tray to my right hand and passed behind Mason's chair, just far enough into his peripheral vision to catch his eye. With my free left, I tapped my wrist twice. Light, quick. NCIS field signal. Stop. Compromised. For one eerie beat, nothing moved. Then a flicker. Barely a ripple at the corner of Mason's mouth, the recognition of a language we'd both learned in different wars. He set the pen down. My earpiece hissed. "Sparrow, stand down. Observe only." A pianist missed a note and recovered. Ice clinked in a glass, like a distant radio click from another life. "Lock the doors," Mason said, voice clean as a cut. The two military police officers by the exit snapped to it without the delay that betrays doubt. Bolts slid home with the heavy confidence of metal deciding for men. Conversations died mid-word. The Vanguard CFO leaned forward, his whisper the shape of a threat in a neutral tone. "General, is this necessary?" Across the table, Mason's aide went still, eyes flitting, not to the general, but to the folder. And I saw it then, a trace of sweat on the hinge of the man's jaw, the kind that appears when you realize the script has changed, and you never learn the next line. "No one leaves," Mason said, "until I review this document." I lowered my tray onto a sideboard, suddenly aware of my own breathing. Observe only. On a far wall, a camera's red LED winked twice, then steadied. Alive, but maybe not recording the angle that mattered. I felt the tremor in my fingers and made them still by touching the linen with the tips, a trick an instructor taught us when a weapon in hand isn't a pistol but a gesture. The Vanguard CEO stood, buttoning his jacket. "General, perhaps this is best handled privately," he said, smile wearing a new expression now. "Polite emergency." "You wouldn't want to embarrass an ally in front of—" Mason didn't look up. He turned pages with the calm of a surgeon rechecking the chart of a patient who arrived breathing and left silent. The room leaned toward him without moving. A senator cleared his throat, glanced at the doors, recalculated whatever he'd brought here tonight. A name to remember, a favor to bank. Somewhere behind me, a waiter murmured, "Excuse me," to a colonel who did not hear him. I watched Mason's eyes as they reached the signature line. I saw the moment belief, met arithmetic, and lost. The blood went from his face not in a rush, but as if a valve closed. "Who brought this here?" he said. His aide hesitated, just long enough to be remembered later in a report. "Corporate courier, sir, cleared at the service entrance." "Name?" "No name, sir, just a badge. Vanguard." The CEO spread his hands. "Documentation moves quickly, General, I'm sure." "This signature belongs to a dead man," Mason said. It wasn't loud, it didn't have to be. Gasps have shapes. This one was a circle. I felt the floor tilt in my bones. The pianist lifted his hands from the keys. The last chord hung in the air like a held breath. At the mirrored pillar, my reflection doubled with another face. Gray suit, ledger line eyes, the watcher still watching. He wasn't looking at Mason now. He was looking at me. Recognition isn't always a smile. Sometimes it's a narrowing, a tiny geometry drawn between two people who should never have been angles in the same proof. "General," the senator began, "let's not—" Mason raised a hand and the sentence stopped obediently in the air. He closed the folder. The red seal stared back at all of us, corrected now by the certainty of a grave. In my ear, control returned, hushed but urgent. "Sparrow, confirm status. Are you in position? Backup staging 2 minutes out. Do not engage." I let my hand rest against the apron and counted a slow 4, the way my father taught me as a child, when storms came over the bay and the power flickered, but we pretended candles were better. My pulse stepped down. My world stepped in. Across the room, the aide touched his collar, a micro gesture, then dropped his hand as if he'd realized someone was cataloging every move. The MP at the west door glanced at the east door MP. Something passed between them that wasn't words. The Vanguard CFO's smile split, then resealed. The lobbyist who'd squinted at me earlier finally found his answer. He didn't know me from a gala. He knew me from a place people don't admit they've been. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mason said, voice steady, "remain where you are." The mirrored pillar caught the room and threw it back at itself. For a blink, I saw 3 of me. The server holding a tray, the agent holding a line, the child counting seconds in the dark. Behind those images, the watcher's gaze landed on my left wrist. His head tilted, only slightly. He had seen the signal. He knew our language, or he had learned enough to be dangerous. The bolts in the doors gleamed. The folder's corners made small right angles with the linen. Something in the ceiling ticked. A thermostatic click, or the sound of a plan changing shape. A thought slid in clean as a blade. If he recognized my signal, I wasn't the only thread sewn into this room. I breathed once more, slow. Observe only, Control had said. But observation changes outcomes the way gravity changes orbits, invisibly, irresistibly. The watcher moved his weight to the balls of his feet, and the doors stayed locked. By sunrise, the ballroom's noise had faded into a hum that lived behind my eyes. The investigation swept in like bleach, cleaning everything but the stain. Statements were taken, plates were cleared. By noon the next day, headlines whispered about a temporary security review. By dusk, my badge was resting on Director Collins's desk, glinting under fluorescent light like evidence of disobedience. "You broke protocol," he said, not unkindly, as if reprimand were simply a tired ritual between us. "I followed my conscience," I answered. He leaned back, studying me through the reflection on the window. Outside, Washington's rain streaked the glass into gray, vertical lines. "Conscience isn't in the manual," he said finally. "Neither is treason," I replied. His eyes flickered, something between irritation and reluctant respect, and then he signed the suspension order with the kind of pen reserved for verdicts. Suspended, not fired, not cleared, just left hanging like a sentence without a period. I drove out of D.C. that night, with the wipers clicking like a metronome for thoughts I didn't want to count. Past Fredericksburg, the traffic thinned and the air changed from exhaust to pine. My father's old farmhouse waited on a dirt road outside Culpeper, Virginia, a square box of wood and memory. He'd died 3 years ago, navy heart, steel spine. His folded flag still sat on the mantel, a triangle of silence that never gathered dust. I unlocked the door and stepped into the smell of cedar and disuse. The house greeted me the way old comrades do, with quiet recognition, no questions asked. I poured coffee from a tin that might have expired last century and sat at the table where my father used to clean his service pistol. The mug warmed my palms. The folded flag watched. "What would you do, old man?" I asked the empty room. His answer came the way memory speaks, out of habit. Never confuse silence with loyalty. The words sat in the air like commandment. At 2100 hours, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Voss," a voice said, deep even. "Meet me. No uniforms, no channels. Lincoln Memorial, midnight." It was Mason. The night pressed close around the city like a glove. The reflecting pool shimmered under thin rain, the monument climbing into low fog like a ghost column. Mason stood at the edge of the water, hands in his coat pockets, hat pulled low. The war hero turned silhouette. "You shouldn't be here," I said. "Neither should you," he replied. "They're cleaning it up." "The evidence?" He nodded once. "Vanguard's lawyers move faster than investigators. Files are disappearing. Names, too." "Then why call me?" He looked at me the way commanders do when they've already made peace with what comes next. "Because they're going to pin it on you." The words landed like recoil. "Me? You broke chain of command. Used unauthorized signals. It's the perfect story. Ambitious agent compromises operation for personal reasons. You're visible, expendable, and your director needs a scapegoat." Rain slid off his brim. I stared at the reflection of the Washington Monument trembling on the pool's surface. "How far does it go?" "Far enough to bury you," he said quietly. Then he reached into his coat and produced a small flash drive sealed in a plastic sleeve. "This holds the original Harbor Light draft, the one before it was altered. Keep it off the grid. Trust no one." "Mason." "Not even me," he said, almost smiling. Then he turned and walked away, his shadow breaking across the water like an afterthought. When I looked down, I was holding the weight of proof that could drown us both. The next morning smelled like wet wood and burned toast. I made the mistake of turning on the news. Commentators already speculating about chain of command irregularities. They had my face blurred, but I recognized the outline. The reporter's voice sounded bored, the way people do when describing other people's disasters. I shut the TV off and opened my laptop instead. If I was being buried, I'd dig first. Vanguard systems, shell corporations, contractor lists, public filings, decades of camouflage disguised as transparency. Patterns began to appear. Payments routed through a logistics firm in Belize, Northstone Logistics, the same company tied to a weapons scandal Mason supposedly shut down years ago. Ghosts resurrected in spreadsheets. By noon, I had 5 browser tabs open and a headache shaped like a target. I needed help. Someone inside the system, but not owned by it. Eli would answer. He'd once been a Marine corporal before taking a civilian job at Quantico's security desk. We'd met on a case 3 years back when he'd stopped a leak in the personnel database. I'd saved his sister's scholarship file from being lost in the red tape that followed. He'd called it Square. I found him in a diner near base, the kind that still used neon signs and filtered coffee through metal strainers. He slid into the booth across from me, scanning the corners automatically. Old habits. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "That's becoming a theme," I answered. I slid him a napkin with coordinates. "Hotel service corridor. Pull the surveillance feeds from that night, especially after the signing was stopped." He raised an eyebrow. "You're off duty, Keira." "I'm off leash," I corrected. 24 hours? He nodded slowly. 24. As I left, he said something that followed me out the door. "They're watching, you know." I didn't ask who they were. Every system has its plural. Night came with the kind of quiet that hums just before lightning. I sat at my father's desk, copying the flash drive onto an encrypted stick, then hid it behind the photograph of him in uniform, the same one that watched over my childhood bedtime prayers. It felt fitting. One ghost guarding another. The rain started again, thin but relentless, tapping against the windows like a code no one had written down. At 2:14 a.m., a knock rattled the door. My body reacted before my mind did, hand to Glock, safety off. "Who is it?" A man's voice answered, smooth and official. "Federal Courier, documents for your review." I hadn't requested any. I stayed silent. The floor creaked under my feet as I moved toward the back window. Outside, down the gravel drive, a dark sedan idled. Headlights off. 2 silhouettes inside. Courier my ass. The knock came again, firmer. "Agent Voss, we just need a signature." The word signature made something cold slide through me. I eased the back door open and slipped into the night. Rain soaked my jacket in seconds. The smell of diesel hung low in the air. I moved along the side of the house, crouching behind the old propane tank, watching the front porch glow faintly under the motion light. The courier knocked once more, then turned his head slightly, speaking into a mic clipped under his collar. Not postal, not friendly. I circled toward the shed, boots sinking in the mud, heart pounding loud enough to have its own echo. By the time the men stepped off the porch, I was halfway across the field toward my car parked under the oak. When the engine roared to life, one of them shouted. A flashlight beam sliced through the rain like a blade. I hit the accelerator. Gravel spat, tires screamed. The beam wobbled and vanished into the mirror. The rear view showed the house shrinking into blackness, the porch light still burning. My father's flag still on the mantel, my own life now the bait. I drove until the road blurred into memory. 2 hours of nothing but rain, diesel trucks, and the thought that danger doesn't always announce itself with gunfire. Sometimes it knocks politely and asks for your signature. When dawn finally broke, pale and tentative, my phone buzzed. Eli. His voice was tight, low. "Keira, you were right." "About what?" "The feeds from the hotel. Someone accessed them the morning after the dinner." "Who?" He hesitated. "Your director, Collins." The line went quiet except for the rain on his end and the sound of my own pulse on mine. By the time the sun rose, my coffee was cold and my thoughts were burning. Collins, the man who quoted "Justice is truth in action," like scripture, who'd told me once that my moral compass was good for PR. He'd accessed the hotel footage himself, less than 12 hours after the dinner. Not an analyst, not a clerk. Him. I called Mason before reason could stop me. He didn't answer. By afternoon, I was parked down the street from his Arlington house, engine off, watching through rain-smeared glass. The general's porch light burned despite daylight. At 16:20, a black SUV slid to the curb. 2 men in gray suits stepped out. Corporate, not military. I knew that confident looseness, that predator's rhythm. They carried briefcases, but their eyes scanned like bodyguards. Through the kitchen window, I saw Mason at the dining table. His face was a study in granite and fatigue. One of the suits pointed at a document, lips moving fast. I couldn't hear the words, but I read the shape of one phrase, damage control, before the Senate hearing. The other man leaned forward, whispering something, his hand flat on the folder. Then, softly, Mason's voice cut through the pain. "You're asking me to bury a crime?" The man smiled, thin. "Not a crime, General. A misunderstanding." Mason's gaze didn't waver. His hand brushed the folder shut with the quiet finality of a trigger pull. Then he looked up, and straight through the glass, right at me. For half a second we were soldiers again, reading orders in the silence between blinks. Then his lips formed two words without sound. Get out. I didn't hesitate. I slipped back to the car, engine turning over like a warning. By the time I reached the first intersection, headlights flared behind me. Same dark sedan. They'd found me again. I turned sharply, doubling back toward Route 50, weaving through late commuters. The sedan followed, distance exact, steady as a mirror. At a red light, my reflection stared back from the side window, jaw clenched, eyes hollow. The face of someone who'd crossed the line from agent to target. I didn't stop until I hit the service road near Quantico. The air smelled of diesel and fear. I called Eli. Safe house, I said, now. The safe house sat behind a rotting fence in the woods, a place we'd used once for witness debriefs no one wanted on paper. The power still worked. The walls still leaned. Eli met me at the door, flashlight beam cutting across his tired face. You look like hell. Compliment accepted, I said, brushing rain off my jacket. Inside, the living room was a command post of clutter. Laptops, cables, a corkboard stripped of old case photos. The air smelled of dust and burnt circuits. He poured 2 coffees and slid one my way. I pulled more than the hotel feed, he said. Ran cross-checks through procurement archives. You were right about Northstone Logistics. They're tied to 3 other shell firms, Aegis Freight, Boldmere Holdings, and Delwyn Maritime, all feeding payments to Vanguard. He turned the laptop toward me. Lines of transactions filled the screen like digital veins, pumping money through offshore accounts. And look at this. He tapped the last entry, an authorization code stamped with Collins's clearance level. Level 7 access, I murmured. That's director only. Exactly. The screen glowed between us, the kind of cold light that makes truth look surgical. Eli leaned back, rubbing his eyes. You think Mason knew? I hesitated. He suspected. That's why he stalled the signing. But he didn't know how deep it went. So what's next? We take it to Mason again. He deserves the proof. You trust him that much? I thought about the way he'd said, get out, not run. A warning, not abandonment. I trust his conscience, I said, if he's still got one. Eli smirked faintly. And Collins? I trust his ambition, I replied. That's the problem. We spent the next 6 hours building a picture no one wanted to see. The more we pulled, the clearer it became. The Harbor Light contract wasn't an isolated fraud. It was one thread in a tapestry of manipulation, deals routed through the dead, sanctioned payments rebranded as logistics aid, all under Vanguard's umbrella. And every authorization funneled upward until it reached Collins's desk. Somewhere near dawn, Eli turned off the screen and leaned back. You realize this is bigger than any of us, right? This isn't about money anymore. It's about control, contracts, votes, wars. I stared at the flash drive Mason had given me, its small shape resting on the desk like the world's most fragile grenade. Control. That word echoed like a drumbeat. My father used to say the same thing when talking about storms. You can't control the wind. You can only hold the line. The line was breaking. By noon, the sky had turned the color of aluminum. I drove back toward Arlington with Eli's encrypted copies in the glove box. At a gas station, I bought a burner phone and dialed Mason's private number again. This time, he answered. Voss, I have something you need to see. Not on this line. Then you pick the place. A pause. Then, old secure room, Pentagon basement. Midnight, no phones, no files, just us. Understood. As I hung up, a text buzzed onto the burner. Unknown sender, just 5 words. Drop the files or you'll be dropped next. No punctuation, just finality. I deleted the text, but its shadow lingered. That night, I didn't go home. I checked into a roadside motel outside Alexandria, one of those half-forgotten ones where the curtains never quite close and the walls remember every conversation. The clerk didn't ask for ID, just cash. Inside, the room smelled of bleach and lost time. I locked the door, shoved a chair under the knob, and laid the flash drive on the nightstand beside my Glock. The red standby light on the TV blinked like a heartbeat. I tried to sleep. Failed. The ceiling fan clicked in uneven rhythm, a metronome for regret. Every few minutes, headlights swept across the window. Some passed. One didn't. At 3:22 a.m., the same dark sedan rolled by once, slowed, then parked across the street. Too close. My pulse thudded. I packed fast, laptop, drive, weapon, father's flag, folded into the bag almost by instinct. The car engine coughed to life, headlights off. I slipped out through the rear exit, gravel crunching softly beneath my boots. As I merged onto the main road, the sedan's headlights flared on behind me. Game on! They followed for 10 miles, keeping distance, rhythm perfect. I cut through an industrial park, warehouses asleep under sodium lamps. At the third intersection, I slammed the brakes, slid between two semi-trailers, and killed my lights. The sedan coasted past, brake lights glowing red like twin eyes. It slowed, paused, then rolled on. I waited another full minute, breath held until my ribs ached, before starting the car again. The clock read 4:01. My hands were shaking so hard the key slipped once before catching. By the time I reached the bridge toward D.C., the first pale wash of dawn was lifting over the river. The city looked distant, dreamlike, as if innocence could be built out of monuments. I gripped the wheel tighter. If they wanted to frame me, they'd have to catch me first. And before that happened, the truth would already be in motion. The Pentagon at midnight smells like paper and secrets. The air is so clean it almost hurts to breathe. Mason was already waiting when I arrived. No uniform, no entourage, just the quiet authority of a man who had carried too many flags and folded too many of them himself. His cane leaned against the table beside two black coffees that had gone cold. "Close the door," he said. I did. The metallic click echoed longer than it should have. He nodded to the flash drive in my hand. "That the copy?" I slid it across the table. Everything we pulled, Collins's authorizations, Vanguard's shell network, 3 levels deep. Mason didn't touch it immediately. He studied my face instead. "You realize what this means if it's real." "It's real," I said. He sighed. "Then it means the system we swore to protect is eating itself." We were silent for a moment, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the space like white noise between confessions. Finally, Mason spoke again. "Admiral Hayes owes me one. Ethics Review Board meets at 900. We'll take it straight there." "By the book?" I asked. He looked at me. "When the book's on fire, you still try to read it before it burns." At 0857, we entered the secured wing of the Pentagon. The corridor felt like the inside of a glacier, cold, still, watchful. Eli met us at the service entrance, his visitor badge hanging crooked from his jacket. "Everything backed up?" I asked. 3 encrypted mirrors. Off-site. You'd have to nuke the internet to erase it now. "Good," Mason said. "Let's make sure the right people see it before the wrong ones bury it." Inside the hearing chamber, 5 officials sat behind a long mahogany table, polished enough to reflect guilt. Admiral Hayes, stern and steady, presided at the center. His eyes flicked from Mason to me with equal weight. "General, Agent Voss," he said, "this meeting wasn't scheduled." "It couldn't be," Mason answered. "Not if we wanted it to stay clean." He set the drive on the table. "These are the original contracts for Project Harbor Light. The authorizing signature belongs to a deceased officer. My aide and Director Collins colluded with Vanguard Systems to falsify the records." Hayes didn't flinch. He gestured for a technician to plug in the drive. The screen behind him bloomed with files, contracts, payment chains, forged seals. One by one, the documents unfolded like confessions. The room stayed silent, except for the soft tap of Hayes's finger against the table. Then quietly, "My God." He turned to me. "Agent Voss, do you corroborate this?" "Yes, sir," I said. I recovered the files directly from Vanguard's internal network. Collins accessed surveillance the next morning and scrubbed evidence. I slid another small drive across the table. "These are the recovered security feeds from the hotel service corridor. You'll see them there, time-stamped, authenticated." Hayes inserted it into the console. The footage flickered to life. Collins in a gray suit, entering the restricted data room at 0703, less than 12 hours after the aborted signing. Mason's jaw tightened. The Admiral leaned back. "Do you realize this will tear through half the Department of Defense?" "Then it's about time something did," Mason said. The door burst open before anyone could respond. Collins stormed in, flanked by 2 MPs. His expression was the polished fury of a man who knows the script, but not the scene. "This meeting is unauthorized," he barked. "All participants are in violation of chain of command protocol." Hayes stood slowly. "Director Collins, we're in the middle of—" "You're in the middle of treason," Collins snapped. "These 2 have compromised classified assets. They're using falsified evidence to derail an ongoing operation." The MPs moved toward us, weapons low but ready. Mason took 1 step forward, his voice dropping into that old command tone that made soldiers remember what obedience really meant. "Stand down." Neither MP moved. One hesitated, eyes darting to Hayes. The Admiral's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Enough, Director. You've been implicated in financial misconduct. Until this board concludes review, you are relieved of duty. For a moment, silence felt physical. Then the nearer MP exhaled, lowered his weapon, and gestured toward Collins. You can't be serious, Collins hissed. You think this changes anything? The system protects its own. Maybe, I said quietly, but not tonight. They escorted him out. The door shut with a dull thud that sounded almost like mercy. Hayes rubbed his temples. You two have broken more rules than I can count. Mason nodded. Then count the lives we might have saved instead. By the time we left the Pentagon, the morning sun was blinding. Reporters were already gathering outside, microphones like bayonets. Somewhere the story had leaked. Maybe deliberately, maybe not. Cameras flashed as we crossed the courtyard. Eli slipped through the crowd, his phone buzzing nonstop. Every network's running it, he said. Defense contract fraud, NCIS agent exposes corruption, General Mason implicated but cooperating. You're trending, Keira. Fantastic, I muttered. Nothing like trial by headline. We ducked into a waiting car. Inside, Mason's expression was unreadable. They'll come after you now, he said. You embarrass powerful men on live feeds. They embarrass themselves, I said. He almost smiled. That's never how they see it. Back at my apartment, I barely had time to drop my keys before my phone buzzed again. Eli's number. Turn on channel 5, he said. The screen showed a press conference. Collins's attorney claiming rogue operative falsified digital evidence under duress. They were building the narrative already. My name and photo filled the corner of the broadcast, labeled Under Investigation. Guess I'm the villain now, I murmured. Guess so, Eli said. But villains get airtime. Heroes get buried. I turned off the TV and stared at the window. The reflection of the city looked fractured, like a mosaic of half-truths. That evening, Hayes called privately. They're offering you a deal, he said. Testify quietly, no press, maybe reinstatement later. And if I don't? They'll make your life paperwork and rumor. I laughed softly. I've been buried before. Night fell heavy. The city hummed with whispers of scandal, but inside my apartment, it was just me and the silence. I opened my laptop one more time, scrolling through the recovered files. Somewhere between invoices and encrypted memos, I found something new. A reference string tagged Sable Reef. Same structure. Same authorization pattern. It wasn't over. A knock startled me. I froze, gun ready. Then a voice, familiar. It's me. Eli stepped in, rain dripping from his jacket. They released Mason, he said. They couldn't make Collins's accusations stick. Relief hit me like oxygen after drowning. Good, I said. He deserves better than that circus. Eli hesitated, eyes serious. So do you. But they're still coming for your record. You sure you want to keep pushing this? I looked past him, out at the city lights flickering like brief truths across the skyline. We didn't come this far to stop halfway. He sighed. Then you'd better sleep while you can. Sleep's a myth, I said. Truth's the only thing that keeps me up. He grinned faintly. That's what scares them. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over the Potomac, long and low, as if the sky itself was giving testimony. Tomorrow, we'd walk into the Senate, and this time, we wouldn't knock. The Senate hearing room was colder than any interrogation cell I'd ever been in. Cameras lined the back wall, red lights blinking like watchful eyes. Mason sat beside me in full dress uniform, every medal a story, every crease a lifetime of obedience. I wore a plain navy suit, no rank, no badge, no protection, but truth. Admiral Hayes sat behind us as witness. The senators filed in, their faces carved into masks of neutrality. When they spoke, it was with the polished cadence of people used to being recorded. Agent Voss, the chairman began, you admit to breaking Navy protocol and acting without authorization? Yes, sir. Why? I took a breath. Because the people above me were compromised, and the system was blind by design. He frowned. Are you saying we should ignore the rules when we disagree with them? No, I said. I'm saying we shouldn't hide behind them when they're being used to protect corruption. A murmur swept through the room. Mason's hand tightened on the table, steady but approving. Another senator leaned forward. Do you regret your actions, Agent Voss? I thought of my father's folded flag, of the ballroom frozen in silence, of Mason's command, lock the doors now. No, sir, I said. I regret that I had to make that choice at all. When it was Mason's turn, his voice filled the chamber like a hymn. Agent Voss acted on conscience when others followed convenience, he said. She broke protocol, yes, but she upheld the spirit of the law when the letter failed. By the time he finished, even the stenographer had stopped typing for a moment. Outside, the flashbulbs exploded like gunfire. Reporters shouted questions. Traitor or hero? Was Collins framed? Is Vanguard finished? I didn't answer. The noise was just static. Eli pushed through the crowd, breathless. You did it, he said. Collins has been charged. Vanguard's CEO was arrested in New York. They're freezing assets. Mason exhaled heavily beside me, as though 20 years of ghosts had finally left his lungs. It's over. I shook my head. No, it's just quieter now. Days blurred into paperwork, hearings, and interviews. The story dominated every channel. Defense contract scandal exposed. NCIS agent defies chain of command. To the public, I was either a savior or a traitor, depending on which station they watched. I was cleared of all charges 2 weeks later, but the reinstatement papers never came. My clearance was under review. My badge still suspended. Mason called one evening as the sun died over the city. You understand you might not get your position back, he said. I never did this for the position, I answered. That's why you deserve it, he said softly. Then he hung up. I left Washington, bought a small cottage near Chesapeake Bay where the sea air tasted like salt and second chances. I painted the porch myself, white against the gray wood, as if order could be rebuilt with a brush. Sometimes I'd wake before dawn and walk to the water. The tide whispered things no hearing ever could. One morning, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. My body tensed until the driver's door opened and Eli stepped out, smiling like he'd just seen daylight for the first time. Still can't stay away from trouble, can you? I said. He grinned. Actually, I came bearing news. He handed me an envelope sealed with the NCIS crest. Inside, a single page. Reinstatement approved. Effective immediately. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I laughed, quiet and a little broken. You've got to be kidding me. Nope, Eli said. Apparently truth still counts for something. Mason called later that evening. I heard, he said. They're offering you a new position, Ethics and Oversight Division. That sounds ironic, I said. Sounds earned, he replied. A week later, I returned to D.C., not as an undercover operative, not as an agent in the field, but as an instructor for new recruits. My classroom was small. White walls, fluorescent lights, a chalkboard that squeaked when written on. The pay was modest, but the faces that looked up at me were bright with belief. On the first day, I wrote 3 words on the board. Honor before protocol. A cadet raised his hand. Ma'am, is that official NCIS doctrine? Not yet, I said, but it should be. They smiled. Some laughed. 1 or 2 just nodded like they understood. After class, I lingered by the window overlooking the training yard. The wind carried the scent of coffee and brass polish, the sound of boots on concrete. It felt strange to be back among uniforms without wearing one. Later that week, Mason visited the academy. He looked older. The cane was more than an accessory now. But the steel in him hadn't rusted. I hear you're stealing my old speeches, he said, settling into a chair near my desk. Borrowing, I corrected, and improving. He chuckled. Good. Maybe they'll do better with them than we did. We sat in silence for a moment, watching cadets march in formation across the courtyard. Their rhythm was thunder-made human. You ever miss it? He asked quietly. Every day. But you don't regret it? Not a second. He nodded slowly. Good. Because sometimes the cost of honor is silence, and sometimes it's peace. That night, I returned home to find an envelope slid under my door. No address, no sender. Just a single line on the folded paper. Harbor Light wasn't the only one. Check Sable Reef. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. I stood there a long time, the paper trembling in my hands. Outside, waves crashed against the shore, each one erasing a little more sand before retreating again. I could chase it, dig deeper, expose another nest of ghosts. But not tonight. Tonight, I allowed myself something rare, stillness. I folded the note carefully and placed it beside my father's flag on the mantel. The folded triangle of fabric caught the last light from the window and held it, steady. For the first time in months, I sat without a weapon within reach. Tomorrow, I'd decide whether to follow the trail. But tonight, I'd let the tide come in. Because sometimes, peace isn't surrender. It's survival. Spring arrived like an apology. The cherry blossoms along the Potomac bloomed early that year, their petals drifting across the parade grounds like snow that refused to fall quietly. I walked through the academy gates each morning with a paper cup of coffee and a stack of lesson plans under my arm, pretending not to notice how the recruits still glanced at me as if I were half legend, half warning. To them, I was the agent who'd defied the chain of command and lived to tell about it. To me, I was just someone who'd finally learned how expensive the truth could be. Mason had retired 2 months earlier. His last message was short, handwritten, mailed the old-fashioned way. Duty is the price of peace. Don't let them turn you into a rule book. He'd moved to a cabin in the Rockies. No fanfare, no press release, just absence, the cleanest exit a man like him could manage. I never saw him again in uniform. My new life settled into a rhythm. Lectures, briefings, essays, graded with the patience I wish someone had once shown me. Some days, I'd watch the trainees file out of the classroom, boots clicking in sync, and wonder which of them would one day stand where I had, alone in a room full of power, forced to choose between obedience and conscience. One afternoon, a cadet lingered after class. She couldn't have been more than 20. She stood by the desk, twisting her notebook in her hands. "Agent Voss?" she asked softly. "Yes?" My dad served under General Mason. He used to say honor was a heavy word. You make it sound possible. I smiled. It is possible. You just have to carry it anyway. She nodded, eyes shining with the kind of belief I thought the world had lost. When she left, I sat alone for a long time, staring at the chalkboard where 3 faint words still ghosted beneath the eraser: honor before protocol. That evening, Mason came to the academy one last time. I didn't know he was coming. He just appeared in my doorway, cane tapping softly against the tile. "I heard you've been rewriting my speeches," he said with a half smile. "Just editing for clarity," I said. "You always use too many metaphors." He chuckled and looked out the window at the cadets drilling below. Maybe they'll do better with them than we did. We watched in silence for a while. The rhythm of their march rolled through the hall like thunder restrained by discipline. "You ever think about writing it all down?" he asked finally. "What, for the record?" "For the reminder," he said, "so people don't forget what honor looks like when it bleeds." He stood, offered his hand. "Take care of them, Keira. The next ones, they'll be walking into a world that tests them faster than we can teach them." "I will," I said. He nodded. "Good, and Keira?" "Yes?" "Don't let them turn you into a rule book." He left that afternoon. The sound of his cane faded down the hall like a metronome for a lesson I'd never stop hearing. 2 months later, I drove to Arlington. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that carries its own silence. Mason's name had been added to the memorial wall, etched in simple letters. Beneath it, the inscription he'd chosen: "Duty is the price of peace." I placed a single white rose beneath his name. "You paid yours," I whispered. An older couple approached while I stood there. The man wore a navy cap. His wife leaned on his arm. "You're Agent Voss, aren't you?" the man asked. "I am." "Our grandson's in your class. He talks about your lectures all the time." I smiled. "Does he?" "He says you told them rules matter, but people matter more." I nodded. "Your grandson's right." They thanked me and walked on, leaving me alone with the quiet hum of distant traffic and the echo of retreat being played somewhere down the hill. For the first time in years, the sound didn't feel like an ending. It felt like home. That night, I sat on my porch by the bay, laptop open, fingers hovering over the keys. Mason's question echoed in my mind. For the record or for the reminder? Maybe both. I started to type. I wrote about the night under the chandeliers, the forged signature, the moment a general said, "Lock the doors," and the world paused long enough for conscience to breathe. I wrote about the silence afterward, about fear disguised as protocol, about the way courage doesn't feel like fireworks, but like exhaustion that refuses to quit. And at the very end, I wrote one final line, the same one I'd told my recruits on their first day. Honor isn't what you wear, it's what you choose when no one's watching. When I finished, I closed the laptop and looked out across the dark water. The moon floated over the bay, its reflection trembling like silver glass, fragile but whole. The world would keep spinning, new scandals would bloom, new names would rise, and most people would forget mine. But maybe somewhere, one young officer would pause before signing a paper or following an order and think twice. That would be enough. Because honor doesn't need applause. It only needs witnesses. If you're hearing this now, take it with you. Remember that truth has a voice, even when it whispers. And if you ever find yourself standing where I once stood, between silence and what's right, choose what your heart can live with. Then tell someone else. Pass it on. Because stories like these aren't about revenge. They're about redemption, and the kind of peace that only comes when you do what's right, even when it costs everything. Thank you for listening. If this story spoke to you, share it with someone who still believes in integrity, in honor, in doing good quietly. Until next time, stay true, stay kind, and remember, honor always finds its way home.